I called my daughter-in-law to ask about Thanksgiving dinner. Her voice went cold. "We didn't have enough chairs, Mom." 3 days later, she called crying, begging me to pay her overdue mortgage. I smiled and said, "Didn't I tell you I sold the house you thought you'd inherit?" Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Clara, and I'm 67 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I look like any other grandmother. Gray hair pulled into a loose bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck, and hands that show the years of hard work. But what you wouldn't see is the story those hands carry. These hands raised 3 children completely alone after my husband died of a heart attack when our youngest was only 5 years old. These hands worked double shifts at County General Hospital for 23 years, scrubbing floors when I had to, holding dying patients' hands when they had no one else, and never once calling in sick because my kids needed to eat. I never remarried. I never even dated. My whole world revolved around Daniel, Emily, and Mike. I made sure they never felt the absence of their father, even though I felt it every single day. I packed their lunches with little notes inside. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every piano recital. When Daniel wanted to go to college out of state, I took out a second mortgage on my house to pay for it. When Emily needed help with her wedding, I gave her my savings. When Mike lost his job, I paid his rent for 6 months without asking for a dime back. I thought that's what mothers do. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought if I gave enough, worked hard enough, and loved deeply enough, my children would grow up to be good people who understood the value of family. And for a long time, I believed I had succeeded. 15 years ago, my oldest son, Daniel, married a woman named Jessica. She was beautiful, charming, and polite during family dinners. I welcomed her with open arms. I told her, "You're not just my daughter-in-law, you're my daughter now." I meant every word. When she and Daniel had their first baby, I was there in the delivery room holding her hand. I babysat every single weekend so they could have date nights. I showed up with groceries when money was tight. I co-signed their car loan when the bank refused them. I hemmed Jessica's curtains, watched their dog when they went on vacation, and even helped them move 3 times. I thought we were close. I thought I was building a relationship that would last forever. Every Sunday, I hosted family dinners at my house. The same house I'd lived in for 30 years, the same house where I raised my children, the same house filled with memories of birthday cakes and Christmas mornings. Jessica always complimented my cooking. Daniel always hugged me goodbye and said, "Love you, Mom." I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But I didn't know that, behind my back, they were counting down the days until I died. I didn't know that every smile, every hug, every "I love you" came with a price tag attached. I didn't know that, to them, I wasn't a mother or a grandmother. I was an investment, a walking, breathing bank account they were just waiting to cash in. And when I finally discovered the truth, it didn't just break my heart. It woke me up. My life had a rhythm to it, a comforting pattern that made me feel like everything was exactly where it should be. Every morning at 6:30, I'd wake up to the sound of birds chirping outside my bedroom window. I'd make myself a cup of chamomile tea, add a spoonful of honey, and sit on my front porch in the old wicker chair that had been there since Daniel was a teenager. I'd watch the neighborhood slowly come to life. Mr. Patterson walking his golden retriever, the Martinez kids waiting for the school bus, young couples jogging past with their strollers. My house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees that turned brilliant shades of gold and red every autumn. It was a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a front yard I took great pride in. My rose garden was my sanctuary. I had 12 different varieties, red, pink, yellow, white, and I knew each one by name. I'd spend an hour every morning watering them, trimming dead leaves, talking to them like old friends. The neighbors used to joke that I had the greenest thumb in the county. Those roses had won me 3 ribbons at the local garden show. After tending to my garden, I'd go inside and prepare for the day. My house was modest but filled with warmth. The living room had floral wallpaper that I'd put up myself 20 years ago. Family photos covered every available surface: graduations, weddings, babies, holidays. My refrigerator was a collage of grandchildren's drawings, held up by magnets from places I'd never visited but always dreamed of seeing. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon or vanilla because I was constantly baking something: cookies for the church bake sale, banana bread for my neighbor who just had surgery, pies for Sunday dinner. Every Tuesday, I volunteered at St. Mary's Food Bank from 9 to 2. I'd sort donations, stock shelves, and help families pick out groceries. There was something deeply fulfilling about serving people who needed help. It reminded me of my own struggles as a young widow and how the community had supported me when I had nothing. I made friends there: other retirees, young mothers, people from all walks of life. We'd laugh together, share stories, and I always left feeling like I'd made a difference. Sundays were sacred. That was family dinner day, and it had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. I'd wake up early and start cooking: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, green bean casserole, and always a dessert, usually apple pie or chocolate cake. By 2 o'clock, my house would smell like heaven. Daniel and Jessica would arrive with the kids around 3. Emily and her husband would show up shortly after, and Mike would roll in fashionably late like always. We'd gather around my old dining table, the same one my husband and I had bought at an estate sale 35 years ago. The kids would run around the backyard while the adults talked about work, weather, and whatever was happening in the news. Jessica would always compliment my cooking and ask for recipes. Daniel would loosen his tie and relax in a way he never seemed to do anywhere else. After dinner, we'd play board games or watch old family videos. Those Sundays made every sacrifice worth it. I'd go to bed each night feeling grateful, blessed, and completely convinced that I had built something beautiful, a loving family that would always be there for each other. I believed in us. I believed in them. I had no idea that the foundation I thought was solid was actually built on lies, greed, and a countdown clock I couldn't see. It started with something so small that I almost didn't notice it. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called Jessica on a Wednesday afternoon, right around the time I knew she'd be picking up the kids from school. I wanted to confirm our dinner plans like I did every year. Ask how many people were coming, what dishes everyone wanted, whether the kids had any new food preferences. It was our tradition. I always hosted Thanksgiving. Jessica answered on the 4th ring. Her voice sounded distant, distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" There was noise in the background. Traffic, maybe the radio. I smiled into the phone, picturing her in the car with my grandchildren. "Hi, sweetheart. I was just calling about Thanksgiving. I'm starting my shopping list and wanted to know if—" "We'll let you know, Mom," she interrupted. Her tone was clipped, almost dismissive. "I have to go. The kids are fighting in the back seat." The line went dead before I could say goodbye. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at it like it might offer an explanation. Jessica had never cut me off like that before. She was always chatty, always eager to discuss holiday plans. We'd spend 20 minutes talking about whether to make sweet potato casserole or mashed potatoes, debating pie flavors, laughing about how much food we always made. This felt different, cold, rushed. I told myself she was just stressed. Kids can be overwhelming. Traffic makes everyone irritable. I put the phone down and went back to folding laundry, but the conversation lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. 3 days later, I decided to drop by their house unannounced. I'd baked a double batch of chocolate chip cookies, the kids' favorite, and thought it would be a nice surprise. I loved seeing their faces light up when Grandma showed up with treats. I drove the 20 minutes to their neighborhood, humming along to the oldies station, imagining the hugs I'd get at the door. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed something immediately. They had new patio furniture on their back deck, expensive-looking wicker chairs with thick cushions, a glass-top table, and a matching umbrella. It must have cost at least $2,000. I remembered Jessica mentioning just last month that money was tight. that they were worried about the mortgage payment. I brushed the thought away. Maybe they'd gotten a good deal. Maybe it was a gift. I walked up to the front door carrying my container of cookies and rang the doorbell. I could hear footsteps inside, then the sound of the lock turning. Jessica opened the door, but only halfway. She didn't smile. She didn't invite me in. "Oh, hi, Mom." Her voice was flat, surprised but not pleased. She was wearing yoga pants and an expensive-looking sweater I'd never seen before. Behind her, I could see into the living room, new throw pillows on the couch, a large flat-screen TV that definitely wasn't there last month. "I brought cookies for the kids," I said cheerfully, holding out the container. "Are they home?" I thought I'd say hi. Jessica took the container without opening the door any wider. "They're doing homework. We're really busy right now, Mom. Thanks for these." She glanced over her shoulder like someone was waiting for her, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Impatience? Annoyance? "Oh, okay." I stood there awkwardly, waiting for an invitation that never came. "Well, I just wanted to—" "Thanks, Mom. We'll talk soon." The door closed gently but firmly in my face. I walked back to my car feeling confused and slightly hurt. I sat behind the wheel for a moment staring at their house. Through the front window, I saw Jessica set my cookies on the counter without even opening the container. She pulled out her phone and started texting, already forgetting I'd been there. Something felt wrong. I couldn't name it yet, but it sat in my stomach like a stone. I drove home from Daniel and Jessica's house with the radio off, my mind replaying the moment the door closed in my face. The silence in the car felt heavy, suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, my knuckles turning white. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for several minutes, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe I'd caught them at a bad time. Maybe Jessica had a headache. Maybe the kids really were doing homework and she didn't want them distracted. I ran through a dozen different explanations, each one more reasonable than the last. Jessica loved me. She'd always loved me. We'd been close for 15 years. You don't just stop caring about someone overnight. I went inside and tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen counters, even though they were already spotless. I reorganized my spice cabinet. I watered my roses, even though I'd already watered them that morning. But no matter how busy I kept my hands, my mind kept drifting back to the look on Jessica's face, that flash of annoyance, like I was an inconvenience, a bother, someone interrupting her day. That night, I called Emily. My daughter had always been the sensitive one, the one who could read emotions in a room before anyone else noticed them. "Sweetheart, can I ask you something?" I tried to keep my voice light, casual. "Have you talked to Daniel and Jessica lately? Do they seem okay to you?" Emily paused. I saw Jessica at Target last week. She seemed fine. Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I just stopped by today and she seemed stressed. I was worried about her." "Mom, you know Jessica gets overwhelmed easily. She's juggling 2 kids, work, the house. I wouldn't read too much into it." Emily's voice was reassuring, logical. "You're probably overthinking." "You're right," I agreed, even though something in my chest disagreed. "You're absolutely right, I'm just being silly." After I hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by family photos and told myself the same thing over and over. I was overreacting. Young mothers get busy. People have bad days. I'd raised 3 children. I knew how exhausting it could be. Jessica deserved grace, patience, understanding. I was being too sensitive, too needy, too much like a lonely old woman who couldn't accept that her family had their own lives. The following week, I didn't call Daniel or Jessica. I waited for them to call me. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped, hoping to see their names on the screen. But it was always someone else. A telemarketer, my friend Nancy from the food bank, a reminder about a dentist appointment. Never them. I told myself it was fine. They were busy. I'd see them Sunday for dinner like always. Everything would go back to normal. This was just a strange phase, a temporary disconnect that happened in all families. I'd been a mother long enough to know that relationships have ebbs and flows. This was just an ebb. At night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone on the nightstand within arm's reach. I'd check it compulsively, making sure the volume was turned up, making sure I hadn't somehow missed a call or text. Nothing. I started praying more. I'd kneel beside my bed, like I used to when the kids were young, and ask God to watch over my family, to keep us close, to help me be less anxious and more faithful. I convinced myself that worry was a sin. That doubt meant I didn't trust in the goodness of the people I loved. I shoved down the gnawing feeling in my stomach. I plastered on a smile when I looked in the mirror. I reminded myself that I was blessed, that my family loved me, that everything was perfectly fine. But deep down, in a place I refused to acknowledge, I knew I was lying to myself. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day where the sky looks like it might snow but never does. I woke up at 5 in the morning, too excited to sleep. This was my favorite holiday, the one day of the year when my entire family gathered under one roof, when my house smelled like butter and cinnamon, when laughter filled every corner and my grandchildren's voices echoed through the halls. I put on my apron and got to work. The turkey went into the oven at 6. I peeled 20 potatoes for mashing, chopped vegetables for the stuffing, rolled out dough for 3 pies, apple, pumpkin, and pecan. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from decades of holiday cooking. I hummed old hymns while I worked, imagining the moment when everyone would walk through the door, when hugs and kisses would fill the entryway, when we'd all sit around the table holding hands for grace. By noon, my kitchen was a masterpiece. The turkey was golden and perfect. The rolls were rising. The pies were cooling on the windowsill. I set the dining table with my good china, the set my mother had given me when I got married, the one I only used for special occasions. I folded cloth napkins, arranged the centerpiece of autumn leaves and small pumpkins, and stood back to admire my work. Everything was ready. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron and picked it up, expecting a message from Daniel saying they were on their way. But it wasn't from Daniel. It was from Emily, a group text to the family chat that included me, Daniel, Mike, and their spouses. Hope everyone has a great dinner at Daniel's tonight. Wish we could be there, but we're heading to Mark's parents this year. Love you all. I read the message 3 times, 4 times. The words didn't make sense. Dinner at Daniel's tonight? I looked around my kitchen, at the turkey, the table, the pies. My hands started shaking. I immediately called Daniel. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. I could hear voices and laughter in the background. His kids, Jessica's voice calling out something about needing more ice. Hey, Mom. His tone was cautious, uncomfortable. Daniel. My voice cracked. Emily just sent a text about dinner at your house tonight. What is she talking about? Everyone's coming here. We always have Thanksgiving here. Silence. Long, horrible silence. Mom. He exhaled slowly. I thought Jessica told you. Told me what? We're hosting this year. Just keeping it small. The kids, Jessica's parents, her sister's family. We didn't think... You didn't think to invite me? The words came out as a whisper. My legs felt weak. I sat down heavily in one of my dining chairs, staring at the empty place settings. It's not like that, Mom. Jessica just... She wanted to keep the numbers down. It's already a lot of people, and I'm your mother, Daniel. My voice was stronger now, fueled by confusion and hurt. I've hosted Thanksgiving for 30 years. I have a turkey in the oven right now. I made your favorite pecan pie. I set the table for 12 people. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. Jessica said she talked to you last week. She said there weren't enough chairs and you understood. Chairs. The word hit me like a slap. I thought back to our brief, strange phone conversation. She'd said, "We'll let you know," and hung up. That was her way of uninviting me? That was her way of telling me I wasn't welcome at my own family's Thanksgiving? But I'm your mother, I repeated, my voice breaking. Daniel sighed. I know, Mom. Look, maybe next year we can. There weren't enough chairs, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. You had room for Jessica's entire family, but not enough chairs for me. Mom, please don't make this difficult. Something inside me cracked. I have to go, Daniel. I hung up before he could respond. I sat at my perfectly set table, surrounded by food I'd spent hours preparing, and stared at the empty chairs. 12 place settings for a dinner party of one. The turkey timer went off in the kitchen. I didn't move. I just sat there as the reality settled over me like frost. For the first time in 40 years, I would spend Thanksgiving completely alone. And it wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Their choice. For 3 days after Thanksgiving, I existed in a fog. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't leave the house. I sat in my living room staring at the family photos on the wall, wondering if any of those smiles had been real. The leftover turkey sat untouched in my refrigerator. I couldn't bring myself to eat it. Every time I walked past the dining room and saw those 12 empty chairs, I felt physically sick. On the third day, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, but when I saw Jessica's name on the screen, something made me pick up. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe she was calling to explain, to make things right. Mom? Her voice was thick with tears, desperate and panicked. Mom, thank God you answered. I need your help. I said nothing. I just waited. It's the mortgage, Mom. We're 3 months behind. The bank sent a foreclosure notice. We could lose the house. She was sobbing now, her words tumbling out in a rush. I've been so stressed. I didn't know who else to call. We need $15,000 by tomorrow or they start the foreclosure process. Can you transfer it? Please? I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who can help us. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at my rose garden. The autumn flowers were beginning to wilt. My voice, when I finally spoke, was eerily calm. You didn't have enough chairs for me, Jessica. Silence on the other end. What? Her crying stopped abruptly. Thanksgiving. You told Daniel there weren't enough chairs for me, but now you have room to ask for $15,000? That's different, Mom. This is an emergency. This is serious. And I wasn't serious? Spending Thanksgiving alone after 40 years of hosting wasn't serious? My hand tightened around the phone. You had room for Jessica's entire family, her parents, her sister, all the kids, but not one chair for me. Jessica's tone shifted. The tears dried up instantly, replaced by something harder, colder. Mom, I don't have time for this guilt trip right now. Our house is on the line. Are you going to help us or not? Didn't I tell you 6 months ago that I was selling my house? The words came out quiet but sharp. The line went completely silent. I could almost hear her brain processing what I'd just said. What? Her voice was barely a whisper now. I'm selling the house, Jessica. I put it on the market in July. I mentioned it at Sunday dinner. You said, "That's nice, Mom," and went back to scrolling on your phone. You're selling the house? Her voice rose an octave. The panic was back, but it wasn't about the mortgage anymore. You can't sell that house, Mom. That house needs to stay in the family. My stomach dropped. Stay in the family? What does that mean? It means... She caught herself, but it was too late. It means that house has been in the family for 30 years. We were counting on it, for our future, for the kids' inheritance. There it was, the truth, naked and ugly, hanging in the air between us. Counting on it? I repeated slowly. You were counting on my house? The house I'm still living in? Jessica's voice turned defensive, almost angry. You can't just sell it without discussing it with us first, Mom. That's a family decision. Daniel and I have been planning. We thought when you passed, we could sell it and use the money to pay off our debts, maybe buy a bigger place. You can't just make these decisions alone. When you passed, the words echoed in my head, They'd been planning my death, planning what they'd do with my house, my money, my life's work. I wasn't their mother. I was an obstacle standing between them and a payday. "You were waiting for me to die," I said, my voice hollow. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. We're just being practical. You're 67 years old. You don't need a house that big. You could move into a retirement community somewhere with less maintenance and you could have my house," I finished for her. Jessica went quiet. She knew she'd said too much. "So let me understand this," I continued, my voice like ice. "You didn't invite me to Thanksgiving because you were angry I might sell the house you're already spending in your head. And now you want me to give you $15,000 to save the house you can't afford while you wait for me to die so you can take mine. Mom, that's not—" I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I sank into a chair and stared at the wall, the full weight of the betrayal crushing down on me. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. And when I was gone, they'd divvy up my life like vultures picking at a carcass. After I hung up on Jessica, I sat frozen in my chair for what felt like hours. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. But then my phone buzzed again. A text message from Emily. "Mom, is it true you're selling the house? Daniel just called me furious. He said you didn't discuss it with anyone. What's going on?" My heart sank even further. Daniel was calling the family, spinning the narrative, making me look like the villain. I texted back immediately. "I mentioned it months ago at Sunday dinner. No one seemed to care then." Emily's response came quickly. "Daniel says you promised him the house when you passed. He's been telling everyone for years that it would be his." I stared at those words until they blurred. Promised him? I had never promised anyone anything. My house was mine. I'd paid for it with my own money, my own sacrifice, my own decades of work. The idea that Daniel had been telling people it was already his made my blood run cold. I called my youngest son, Mike. He was the honest one, the one who'd always told me the truth even when it was uncomfortable. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, I heard about the house thing. That's pretty wild." "Mike, did Daniel tell you I promised him my house?" There was a pause. "Well, yeah, he's mentioned it a bunch of times over the years. He said you told him that since he's the oldest and has kids, the house would go to him when you're gone. He even showed us pictures of renovation ideas he had." My vision blurred with tears. "Mike, I never promised him anything. I never had that conversation with him. Ever." Mike went quiet. "Are you serious?" "I'm dead serious. He's been lying." "Jesus, Mom. He's been talking about that house like it's a done deal. He and Jessica have plans. They've even discussed what they'd do with the money if they sold it." "What money?" My voice was shaking now. "The house is worth like $600,000, right? They figured they'd sell it, pay off their debts, and use the rest as a down payment on something bigger." Mike sounded uncomfortable now, realizing he was revealing things he probably shouldn't. "I thought you knew about all this." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "How long has he been planning this?" "I don't know, Mom. Years, maybe. It's just something he's always talked about. We all kind of assumed it was true." After I hung up with Mike, I sat down at my computer. I needed to see the evidence with my own eyes. I logged into my email and started searching through old messages. And then I found it, an email from 6 months ago that Jessica had accidentally forwarded to me instead of her sister. It had been buried in my spam folder, probably because of the way it was worded. I opened it and read, "Sarah, I'm so stressed about money, but it's going to be okay in the long run. Once the old lady is gone, we'll sell that house for at least $600K. Daniel says she's too sentimental to ever sell it herself, so we just have to wait. I know it sounds terrible, but we've put up with her for 15 years. The least she can do is leave us something substantial. We've earned it. Talk soon. Jay." The old lady. That's what she called me. Not Mom, not Clara. The old lady. I read the email 5 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. We've earned it. Like loving me was a job. Like being part of my family was work they deserved compensation for. Like I was a paycheck they'd been waiting to cash. I searched through more emails. I found a text thread that Daniel had accidentally included me on months ago, just one message before he realized and removed me. It was to his friend Mark. "Can't wait till Mom's house is ours. Gonna gut the whole first floor and flip it. Easy $200K profit." My hands trembled as I clicked through more messages. I found a forwarded Zillow estimate, a saved Pinterest board titled Future House Renovation, a spreadsheet calculating the profit margin after selling my home. They'd been planning this for years. Not just Jessica, Daniel too, my son. The boy I'd raised, sacrificed everything for, loved with every fiber of my being. He'd been waiting for me to die so he could profit from it. He'd been lying to his siblings, manipulating the family narrative, positioning himself as the rightful heir to something that was never his. And the worst part? He'd convinced everyone else it was true. Emily believed it. Mike believed it. They all thought I'd promised Daniel the house because he'd been saying it so confidently, so consistently, that it became accepted as fact. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the computer screen illuminating my face in the dark room. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or a daughter-in-law who didn't like me. This was a calculated, long-term plan. They'd been playing a game I didn't even know existed, and I'd been the pawn. But now I knew, and everything was about to change. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my living room. The weight of everything I discovered pressed down on my chest until I couldn't breathe. I stumbled to my bedroom, locked the door behind me even though I was alone, and collapsed onto my bed. And then, for the first time since my husband died 42 years ago, I completely fell apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I'd kept locked away for decades. They were ugly, gasping, full-body sobs that shook my entire frame. I cried into my pillow so hard that my throat burned. I cried until my eyes were swollen shut. I cried until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness. When I finally caught my breath, I looked around my bedroom through blurred vision. This room held so many memories. The dresser where I used to fold tiny baby clothes at 2 a.m, the rocking chair where I'd nursed all 3 of my children, the closet that still held my husband's old jacket because I could never bring myself to give it away. This house was my life. Every corner held a piece of my story. I pulled myself off the bed and walked to my closet. On the top shelf, I kept photo albums, dozens of them, chronicled by year. I pulled down the one labeled Daniel, birth to age 10, and sat on the floor, opening it with trembling hands. There he was, my beautiful baby boy with the bright blue eyes and the gap-toothed smile. I turned the pages slowly, each photograph a knife to my heart. Daniel's first day of kindergarten, wearing the backpack I'd saved for 3 months to buy. Daniel at his Little League game, where I was the only parent who never missed a single match, even when I had to work the night shift right after. Daniel's 10th birthday party, the one where I made a homemade cake shaped like a dinosaur because we couldn't afford a bakery cake. I remembered the night this photo was taken. He'd hugged me so tight and whispered, "You're the best mom in the whole world." I'd believed him. God, I'd believed every word. I grabbed another album. Daniel's high school graduation. I was there in the front row, crying tears of joy, so proud I thought my heart might burst. I'd worked 70-hour weeks that year to pay for his college applications, his SAT prep courses, his new suit for interviews. I'd gone without health insurance for 2 years so he could go to his dream school out of state. Then his wedding album. I flipped to the mother-son dance. Daniel was looking down at me with what I thought was love. The DJ had played A Song for Mama, and I'd cried happy tears, thinking about how lucky I was to have raised such a good man. Jessica was in the background of one photo, smiling at us. Had she been smiling at the future payday? Had she already been calculating what I was worth? I picked up the most recent album, the one filled with grandchildren, birthday parties I'd planned and paid for, Christmas mornings where I'd bought too many presents because I wanted to see their faces light up, Summer vacations where I'd given Daniel and Jessica money for the trip because they said they couldn't afford it otherwise. Every single sacrifice flashed through my mind like a nightmare slideshow. The overtime shifts, the skipped meals, the winter I kept my heat at 58 degrees to save money for Daniel's textbooks, the romantic relationships I'd turned down because dating meant less time and money for my kids, the dreams I'd deferred, the trips I'd never taken, the life I'd never lived because I thought being a good mother meant giving everything and keeping nothing for myself. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror across from my bed. Really looked. I saw a 67-year-old woman with gray hair and wrinkles earned from decades of worry and work. I saw tired eyes that had cried too many tears. I saw hands that were rough and worn from a lifetime of service. I saw a woman who'd worked herself to the bone for people who saw her as nothing more than an inheritance. Was I just a bank account to them? I whispered to my reflection. The woman in the mirror stared back at me with hollow eyes that had no answer. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the babysitting, all the times I dropped everything to help them. Every "I love you, Mom" now felt like a transaction. Every hug felt like a deposit into an account they planned to withdraw from the moment I stopped breathing. The walls of my house, the ones I'd painted myself, the ones that had witnessed every milestone and every memory, now felt like a prison. This place I'd loved so dearly had become a monument to my own foolishness. I'd built a shrine to family and they'd turned it into a real estate investment. I laid back down on my bed, curled into a ball, and stared at nothing. The grief was overwhelming, suffocating. It wasn't just about losing my son's love. It was about realizing I'd never really had it. Not the way I thought. Not the way a mother dreams of being loved by her child. I'd given them everything, and they'd given me nothing but lies and greed, wrapped in false smiles. The darkness outside my window matched the darkness inside my heart. I closed my eyes and wished, just for a moment, that I could disappear, that I could stop existing, so I wouldn't have to feel this unbearable pain. But somewhere, deep in that darkness, a small spark of something else began to flicker. Something that felt like anger, like rage, like the refusal to be a victim anymore. I woke up the next morning and something had changed. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened. Maybe sometime in those dark hours before dawn when I'd finally stopped crying and started thinking. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone, but it had transformed into something sharper, something with edges, something that felt like power. I got out of bed and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were red and swollen from crying. My face was pale, and I looked every bit of my 67 years. But as I stared at my reflection, I made a conscious decision. I was done being a victim. I was done crying over people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine with a pulse. I was done letting them control the narrative of my life. They wanted to wait for me to die? Well, I had news for them. I was very much alive. And I was about to remind them of that fact. I washed my face with cold water, pulled my hair back into a neat bun and got dressed. Not in my usual comfortable house clothes, but in a navy blue dress and the pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. I looked at myself one more time. I looked like a woman who meant business. Good. I went to my kitchen and made a pot of strong coffee. While it brewed, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. For the next hour, I wrote down everything. Every piece of evidence, every conversation, every lie Daniel had told, the email from Jessica, the text messages, the timeline of their deception. I documented it all in clear, precise handwriting. When I finished, I picked up my phone and called Margaret Hartwell. Margaret had been my attorney for 15 years, ever since she'd helped me update my will after my friend Nancy's husband died and left a legal mess. She was in her mid-50s, sharp as a razor, and took no nonsense from anyone. If I was going to fight back, I needed her in my corner. Clara? Margaret's voice was warm when she answered. "How are you? I haven't heard from you in months." "Margaret, I need to make some changes to my will," I said, my voice steady and calm. "And I need your advice on something else. Can I come to your office today?" There must have been something in my tone because Margaret didn't ask questions. "I'll clear my afternoon. Come by at 2 o'clock." I hung up and looked at my list again. A plan was forming in my mind, piece by piece, like a puzzle coming together. They'd played me for a fool for years, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They thought I was just a sentimental old woman too attached to her memories to see what was happening right in front of her face. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. I spent the rest of the morning gathering documents, my house deed, my bank statements, copies of emails and text messages. I put everything in a folder and held it against my chest like armor. This was my life, my work, my legacy, and I'd be damned if I was going to let them steal it from me. At 1:30, I got in my car and drove to Margaret's office downtown. The November air was crisp and cold, but I felt warm with purpose. As I walked into the building, I stood a little taller. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My eyes were clear and focused. Margaret greeted me at the door of her office with a concerned look. "Clara, you look like you've been through hell. What happened?" I sat down in the chair across from her desk, placed my folder in front of me, and met her eyes. "I need to tell you about my son and his wife, and when I'm done, I'm going to need your help making sure they never profit from my pain." Margaret leaned forward, her expression shifting from concern to professional focus. "I'm listening." I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, piece by piece. I told her about Thanksgiving, about the phone call with Jessica, about the emails and the lies and the years of manipulation. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "Clara, what exactly do you want to do here?" I took a deep breath. "I want to update my will. I want Daniel removed completely. I want to make sure he doesn't get a single penny from my estate. And I want to set a trap." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "A trap?" A small, cold smile crossed my face. For the first time in days, I felt like myself again. Only stronger, only smarter, only ready. They think I'm a foolish old woman they can manipulate. I want them to keep thinking that right up until the moment they realize they've lost everything. Margaret studied me for a moment, then slowly smiled back. "Clara, I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and I have to say, I've never been more proud of a client. Let's make sure they understand exactly what they threw away." She pulled out a fresh legal pad and clicked her pen. "Now, let's get to work." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt hope. Not the naive hope of a woman who believed in unconditional family love, but the fierce, determined hope of a woman who'd finally decided to stop being a doormat and start being a force to be reckoned with. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to learn that I'd been playing on easy mode. Now the gloves were off. Margaret and I spent 3 hours in her office that afternoon, meticulously crafting a plan that would ensure Daniel and Jessica understood exactly what they'd lost. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. It was about making sure that their greed would be their own undoing. "First things first," Margaret said, pulling up my existing will on her computer. "We need to update this immediately. You currently have your estate divided equally between Daniel, Emily, and Mike, correct?" I nodded, my jaw tight. "We're removing Daniel entirely. Your estate will be split between Emily and Mike, with a significant portion, let's say 30%, going to St. Mary's Food Bank where you volunteer. Does that sound right to you?" "Perfect," I said. The idea of my money helping people who actually needed it, rather than funding Daniel and Jessica's greed, filled me with a sense of rightness I hadn't felt in days. Margaret typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm also adding a no contest clause. If Daniel tries to challenge this, will in court, he'll forfeit any potential inheritance entirely. And I'm including a detailed explanation of why he's been removed, so there's no ambiguity about your mental state or decision-making capacity. What about the house? I asked. Margaret looked up. You mentioned on the phone that you were thinking about selling. Are you still planning to go through with that? I thought about it for a moment. That house held 40 years of memories, both beautiful and painful. But staying there now felt like living in a museum of my own foolishness. Yes, I want to sell it, as soon as possible. Then let's move forward with that. I'll connect you with a real estate agent I trust. Given the current market, your house should sell quickly, probably within a month or two. Margaret paused, studying me carefully. But here's where. It gets interesting. You could tell Daniel and Jessica right now that you're selling, or, I leaned forward, or we set a trap. We let them think they've still got a chance. Margaret's eyes gleamed with strategic brilliance. You call Daniel and Jessica. You tell them you've been thinking about what Jessica said. You tell them you've reconsidered selling the house. You invite them over for a family meeting this Sunday to discuss your plans and the future of the estate. My heart began to beat faster. And then you invite Emily and Mike too, but you don't tell Daniel and Jessica they're coming. You also don't tell them that I'll be there. Margaret smiled. We let Daniel and Jessica show up expecting to manipulate you into keeping the house in the family. They'll probably come with a whole performance. Apologies, tears, promises. Let them dig their own grave. And then we spring the trap? I said quietly. Exactly. I'll bring the updated will. We'll have copies of all the evidence, the emails, the text messages, everything. And here's the brilliant part. Margaret leaned forward conspiratorially. We record the entire conversation. If Daniel and Jessica say anything incriminating, anything that proves they were planning to inherit your house, we'll have it documented. I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years. Control, agency, power. There's one more thing I want to do, I said. I want to buy a small voice recorder. I want to keep it in my living room during the meeting, something subtle they won't notice. Margaret nodded approvingly. Smart. As long as you're in your own home and you're part of the conversation, it's perfectly legal in this state. Whatever they say will be admissible evidence if needed. We spent the next hour rehearsing. Margaret played the role of Jessica, throwing out manipulative arguments, and I practiced staying calm and composed. She taught me how to ask leading questions, how to get them to admit their real intentions on tape. The key, Margaret explained, is to let them think they're winning. Let them get comfortable. Let them say the quiet part out loud. Greedy people always overplay their hand when they think they've got the upper hand. By the time I left Margaret's office, I had a clear action plan. Step 1, update the will immediately and have it notarized. Step 2, move forward with selling the house, but keep it quiet. Step 3, call Daniel and Jessica with my sweet, concerned mother voice and invite them to Sunday's family meeting. Step 4, set up the recorder. Step 5, let them expose themselves. I drove to an electronics store and purchased a small, discreet digital voice recorder. The young clerk showed me how to use it, and I practiced in my car until I was confident. Then I drove home, sat in my living room, and pulled out my phone. I took a deep breath and dialed Daniel's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. Mom. I made my voice soft, a little shaky, like a confused old woman who'd been thinking things over. Daniel, sweetheart, I've been doing a lot of thinking since Jessica called. About the house, about family, about everything. I could practically hear him sit up straighter. Yeah, Mom. I think maybe I was too hasty. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should keep the house in the family. I paused for effect. Why don't you and Jessica come over this Sunday? Let's sit down together and talk about this properly. I want to discuss my plans for the future and make sure everyone's on the same page. The relief in his voice was palpable. That's great, Mom. That's really great. We'll be there. What time? 2 o'clock. I'll make coffee and cookies. Perfect. And Mom, thank you. I know this has been hard, but family is everything. We'll figure this out together. Sunday arrived with crisp winter sunshine streaming through my windows. I woke up at dawn, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear-headed and focused. Today was the day everything would come to light. Today, the masks would come off. I spent the morning preparing my living room like a stage for a performance. I placed the small digital recorder inside a decorative tissue box on the side table, tested it 3 times to make sure it was working perfectly, then positioned it at an angle where it would capture every voice in the room. I arranged the furniture carefully, the sofa where Daniel and Jessica would likely sit, chairs positioned for Emily and Mike, and my favorite armchair where I would sit, the matriarch observing her kingdom one last time. I baked chocolate chip cookies, letting the warm, familiar scent fill the house. I brewed a full pot of coffee. I set out my good china cups and saucers, the ones I only used for special occasions. Everything had to look normal, welcoming, like the mother they thought they knew. At 1:30, Margaret arrived through the back door as we'd planned. She was dressed in a sharp gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. "How are you holding up?" she asked, squeezing my hand. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. We went over the plan one more time. Margaret would stay in the kitchen, out of sight, until the right moment. I would start the conversation, let Daniel and Jessica talk, let them reveal their true intentions. When the time was right, I'd give Margaret a signal. I'd say the phrase, "I think we need to make this official," and she'd enter with the documents. At 1:50, Emily and Mike arrived together, both looking confused. "Mom, what's this about?" Emily asked, giving me a hug. "Your text said it was important." "It is, sweetheart. Just wait. Everyone will be here soon." I poured them coffee and could see the questions in their eyes, but they trusted me enough not to push. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart rate picked up, but my hands stayed steady. I pressed the record button on the device hidden in the tissue box. Through the window, I watched Daniel and Jessica get out of their car. Jessica was carrying a folder, probably printouts of retirement communities or realtor comparisons. Daniel had his arm around her, and they were both smiling. They thought they'd already won. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and walked to the door with a gentle smile on my face. When I opened it, Jessica immediately pulled me into a hug. "Mom, thank you so much for reconsidering. We've been so worried about you." Come in," I said warmly, playing my part perfectly. They walked into the living room and stopped short when they saw Emily and Mike sitting there. Daniel's smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, I didn't know this was a whole family thing." "Of course it is," I said sweetly. "This affects everyone, doesn't it? Please, sit down." Daniel and Jessica exchanged a quick glance, but sat on the sofa as I'd anticipated. Jessica placed her folder on the coffee table. Daniel loosened his tie slightly, and I could see a bead of sweat forming on his temple, despite the cool temperature in the room. I settled into my armchair, folded my hands in my lap, and looked around at my children. Emily and Mike looked curious and slightly concerned. Daniel looked nervous but hopeful. Jessica looked calculating, her eyes already moving around the room as if appraising the furniture. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm and measured. "I asked you here because I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about family, about this house, and about my future." Jessica leaned forward eagerly. "We've been thinking about that too, Mom. We actually brought some information that might help." She reached for her folder. "In a moment, Jessica," I said gently but firmly. She sat back, slightly taken aback. I turned to Daniel. "Son, I want to ask you something directly. Have you been telling people that I promised you this house when I pass away?" The room went silent. Emily and Mike both turned to look at Daniel. His face went pale, then flushed red. Mom, we talked about it. You said, "I want to know exactly what you've been telling people. What did I supposedly promise you?" Daniel stammered. You said that, as the oldest, with a family, it made sense for the house to stay with me. You said you wanted it to stay in the family. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel, Mom never said that. I was at those dinners. She never promised you anything. She implied it. Jessica jumped in, her voice defensive. She talked about family legacy all the time. I kept my voice level. Talking about family legacy is not the same as promising you my house. Did you, or did you not, tell your siblings that this house was already yours? The silence was deafening. Mike spoke up, his voice tight with anger. He did, Mom. He's been saying it for years. He even showed me renovation plans. Daniel's face crumbled. We just assumed. You assumed I'd die and leave you everything, I said quietly. You assumed wrong. Jessica's mask slipped. Her face hardened, and her voice lost its sweetness. So what is this? You brought us here to humiliate us? After everything we've done for you? I felt the rage building but kept it controlled. Everything you've done for me? Tell me, Jessica, what exactly have you done? Margaret opened her briefcase with deliberate slowness, the sound of the latches clicking echoing through the dead silent room. She pulled out a stack of documents and placed them neatly on the coffee table. Jessica had gone completely still, her face frozen in an expression somewhere between shock and fury. Daniel looked like he might be sick. What is this? Daniel finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward in my chair, my hands still folded calmly in my lap. This is the truth, Daniel. Something you and Jessica seem to have forgotten the meaning of. Margaret pulled out the first document, a printed copy of Jessica's email to her sister. She read it aloud in a clear, professional voice. Once the old lady is gone, we'll sell that house for at least $600K. Daniel says she's too sentimental to ever sell it herself, so we just have to wait. I know it sounds terrible, but we've put up with her for 15 years. The least she can do is leave us something substantial. We've earned it. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mike's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles working in his face. Jessica's face turned bright red, then white. Where did you get that? That was private. You sent it to me by accident 6 months ago, I said calmly. It went to my spam folder. I only found it a few days ago when I went looking. Daniel stood up abruptly. Mom, let me explain. Sit down, I said again, my voice like iron. He sat. Margaret continued, pulling out another document. Here we have text messages where Daniel discusses gutting the first floor of his mother's house and flipping it for a $200,000 profit. Looked at Daniel over her reading glasses. Would you like me to read those aloud as well? You had no right to go through my messages. Daniel's voice was rising, panic setting in. You had no right to plan my funeral while I'm still alive, I shot back, and the fire in my voice finally broke through. You didn't invite me to Thanksgiving because you were angry I might sell the house you'd already spent in your imagination. You told me there weren't enough chairs for your own mother. But 3 days later, you had the audacity to call me crying about your mortgage, asking for $15,000. Jessica found her voice, and it came out sharp and defensive. We needed that money. We could have lost everything. And what about what I lost? I stood up now, my whole body shaking with controlled rage. I lost my son. I lost my family. I lost 15 years believing I had a daughter-in-law who loved me when all along you were just waiting for me to die so you could cash in. That's not fair, Jessica shouted. We took care of you. We included you in everything. Included me? My voice broke. You didn't have enough chairs for me at Thanksgiving. You called me the old lady in your emails. You made spreadsheets calculating how much profit you'd make from selling my house. That's not love, Jessica. That's a business transaction. Emily was crying now, her hands covering her face. Mike stood up and walked over to Daniel, his voice shaking with anger. How could you do this to her? She gave you everything. Daniel's face crumbled, tears streaming down his cheeks. I didn't mean for it to be like this. We've been struggling financially, and we thought, you thought you'd inherit your way out of debt, I finished. You thought you could manipulate me, lie to your siblings, and plan my estate like I was already dead. Margaret pulled out the final document, my updated will. Mrs. Henderson has made some changes to her estate planning. Daniel, you have been completely removed from her will. You will inherit nothing. Her estate will be divided between Emily and Mike, with 30% going to St. Mary's Food Bank. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face going pale. Mom, no, please. You can't. I already did, I said quietly. The will was updated, signed, and notarized 3 days ago. Jessica exploded. This is insane. You're punishing us for being practical, for planning ahead. That house is worth over $500,000 and you're just going to give it away to strangers? I already sold it, I said, and the room went completely silent. What? Daniel whispered. I sold the house. The closing was yesterday. The money is already in a trust fund for Emily and Mike's children's education, with a portion going to the food bank. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. You wanted to wait until I died to take it from me, so I made sure you'd never get the chance. Jessica's face twisted with pure rage. You spiteful, selfish— Careful, Margaret interrupted, her voice cold. You're being recorded. Everything you've said today has been documented. Jessica's mouth snapped shut. Daniel looked around the room wildly, finally spotting the tissue box on the side table. His face went gray. This whole meeting was a setup, he said numbly. No, I corrected him. This whole relationship was a setup. You set me up to be your retirement plan. I just made sure the truth came out before you could profit from my death. Emily stood up and walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Mike joined her. We love you, Mom. Really love you. Not your house or your money. You. I held my younger children close, feeling their genuine warmth, their real love. Then I looked at Daniel and Jessica, who stood there like strangers in my living room, because that's what they'd always been. Strangers wearing the masks of family. I want you to leave now, I said quietly. Both of you. And don't come back. Daniel's face was streaked with tears. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can't we? There's nothing left to say, Daniel. You made your choice years ago. Now you have to live with it. Jessica grabbed her purse, her face twisted with bitterness. This isn't over. We'll fight this. We'll contest the will. Margaret smiled coldly. Please do. There's a no contest clause. If you challenge it, you'll forfeit everything and face legal fees you clearly can't afford. But by all means, try. Jessica grabbed Daniel's arm and dragged him toward the door. At the threshold, Daniel turned back one last time, his face broken. Mom, I really am sorry. I looked at the man I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, and felt nothing but emptiness where love used to be. So am I, Daniel, so am I. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt free. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We don't have to sit here and be interrogated. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made her freeze. We're not finished. The tension in the room was electric. Everyone was staring at me, waiting. This was the moment. I looked toward the kitchen door. I think we need to make this official, I said clearly. The kitchen door opened and Margaret walked in carrying her briefcase. Daniel's face went white as a sheet. Jessica's mouth fell open. What is she doing here? Daniel whispered. Margaret set her briefcase on the coffee table and looked around the room with professional composure. I'm here as Mrs. Henderson's attorney. We have some documents to review. The trap had been sprung, and there was no escape. I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand. Family is everything. The words tasted like ash. But Sunday was coming, and so was the reckoning. The weeks following that Sunday were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet transformations. Margaret handled everything with efficient precision. The finalization of the house sale, the distribution of funds into the trust accounts, the legal documentation that ensured Daniel could never challenge my decisions. Every signature I made felt like cutting another cord that had been strangling me for years. Within a month, Daniel and Jessica's carefully constructed life began to unravel. Without my financial safety net and unable to pay their overdue mortgage, the bank moved forward with foreclosure proceedings. I heard through Emily that they'd tried to borrow money from Jessica's parents, but even they had grown suspicious of the couple's spending habits and refused. Their expensive patio furniture, the new television, the designer clothes Jessica wore, all of it was being sold off piece by piece to keep them afloat. Emily told me, tears in her eyes, that Daniel had called her begging for a loan. When she refused, he'd said things, ugly things about how she and Mike had turned against him, how I'd poisoned them all with my bitterness. The mask had completely fallen away. The charming son I thought I'd raised had revealed himself to be nothing more than a desperate, greedy stranger. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy about their downfall. I simply felt free. Free from the weight of their expectations. Free from the lies I'd been telling myself about what family meant. 2 months after that terrible Sunday, I moved into a cozy townhouse just 15 minutes from Emily's home. It was smaller than my old house, but it was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a little patio garden where I could grow my roses, and large windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Emily helped me unpack, and as we arranged my furniture and hung my pictures, I realized something beautiful. I was starting over. At 67 years old, I was finally living for myself. Emily visited often, sometimes with her husband and kids, sometimes alone. We'd have coffee on my patio and talk about everything: her work, her children, her dreams. Real conversations, not the performative family gatherings I'd hosted for years. Mike drove up from 2 hours away at least twice a month, bringing his wonderful sense of humor and genuine warmth. My younger children showed me what real love looked like. Not obligation, not calculation, but choice. They chose to spend time with me because they wanted to, not because they were waiting for something. I started painting again. I'd given it up 30 years ago when the kids were young and I needed to work extra shifts instead. Now, with my afternoons free, I set up an easel in my second bedroom and lost myself in colors and canvas. I wasn't very good, but it didn't matter. The act of creating something beautiful just for myself felt revolutionary. I joined a book club at the Osaka local library. 8 women ranging from their 50s to their 80s, all sharp, funny, and refreshingly honest. We met every other Tuesday, drank wine, argued about plot points, and laughed until our sides hurt. I made friends who knew nothing about my past, who liked me just for being Clara, not for what I could give them. On my 68th birthday, Emily and Mike threw me a small party in my new townhouse. There were only 6 of us: Emily's family, Mike and his girlfriend, and my friend Nancy from the food bank. We ate cake, played charades, and I blew out candles on a homemade carrot cake that Emily had baked from scratch. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I realized something profound. This small gathering held more genuine love than 40 years of Sunday dinners ever had. Quality over quantity, truth over performance, real connection over obligatory tradition. The grandchildren still visited, Emily's kids every week, and eventually even Daniel's children started coming around again, though without their parents. I'd never punish innocent children for their parents' greed. I spoiled them with cookies and art supplies and afternoon adventures. But I did it on my terms, in my space, when I chose to. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything fell apart, I was tending to my roses on the patio when my phone rang. It was Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Then curiosity got the better of me. I answered, "Mom." His voice was small, broken. I wanted you to know that Jessica and I are separating. The stress, the money problems, everything we couldn't make it work." I said nothing. "I've been in therapy," he continued, "trying to understand how I became this person, how I treated you. And I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just needed to say it." I looked out at my roses, at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. "I appreciate you saying that, Daniel. I really do. But sorry doesn't undo the years of lies. It doesn't erase the fact that you saw me as an inheritance instead of a mother." "I know," he whispered. "I know." "I hope you find peace, Daniel. I really do. But I found mine, and it doesn't include you." I hung up and set the phone down. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt complete, whole, like a chapter had finally, definitively closed. That evening, I video called my grandchildren through Emily's phone. We played a virtual game, and their laughter filled my little townhouse with joy. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and smiled. I'd spent 40 years giving everything to people who valued nothing. Now I was spending my time giving to people who valued everything, including me. I'd lost a son but found myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. For the first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval, anyone else's needs, anyone else's inheritance plans. I was just living, and it was beautiful. A year has passed since that Sunday when everything changed. I'm sitting on my patio right now, the same spot where I've spent countless mornings watching the sunrise with a cup of tea in my hands. My roses are in full bloom, deep reds, soft pinks, cheerful yellows. They're thriving in this new soil, in this new space, just like I am. I think about that empty chair at Thanksgiving often. At the time, it felt like the most painful rejection of my life. But now I understand it was actually a gift. That empty chair showed me the truth I'd been too afraid to see for years. It revealed that some people only love what you can give them, not who you are. And once I saw that truth clearly, I couldn't unsee it. The hardest lesson I've learned is this: being a good mother doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. It doesn't mean enabling greed or tolerating disrespect just because someone shares your blood. Real love, the kind worth keeping, doesn't come with a price tag attached. It doesn't count down the days until you die so it can cash in. Real love shows up. It makes room at the table. It values your presence more than your presence. I spent 40 years believing that giving everything meant I was doing it right. I worked myself to exhaustion, skipped meals, went without, and poured every ounce of my energy into my children because I thought that's what good mothers do. But what I didn't realize was that I was teaching them that my worth was measured only in what I could provide. I never taught them to value me as a person, as Clara, as a woman with dreams and needs of her own. That was my mistake, and it took losing my son to learn it. But here's what I gained. I gained myself back. I gained the ability to say no. I gained friendships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I gained mornings where I paint just because I want to, afternoons where I read books without guilt, and evenings where I choose who I spend my time with based on how they make me feel, not on who they're related to. Emily asked me recently if I ever regret what I did, if I ever wish I'd just forgiven Daniel and moved on. I thought about it carefully before answering. No, I told her, because forgiveness without consequences isn't love. It's enabling. I can forgive Daniel for what he did and still refuse to let him do it again. Those two things can coexist. The truth is, family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by showing up when it matters and meaning it when you say, "I love you." I have family now: Emily, Mike, my grandchildren, Nancy from the food bank, the women in my book club, my neighbor who brings me tomatoes from her garden. These people love me for me, not for what I might leave behind when I'm gone. I look at my reflection now and I see something different than I did a year ago. I see a woman who survived betrayal and came out stronger. I see gray hair earned through years of living, not just existing. I see hands that are finally creating beauty for their own sake. I see a woman who chose herself, and in doing so, found real peace. Greed is a cancer that eats families from the inside out. It turns children into strangers and love into transaction. It makes people forget that the greatest inheritance anyone can receive isn't money or property. It's the memory of being truly, unconditionally loved. I gave Daniel everything except the one thing he actually needed: boundaries. I taught him that he could take and take and take without consequence. When I finally drew a line, it was too late. The damage was done. But it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to walk away from people who see you as a means to an end. It's never too late to build a life that feels authentic and true, even if it looks nothing like the life you planned. So here I am, 68 years old, living in a townhouse instead of my family home, estranged from my oldest son, and happier than I've been in decades. Because I finally understand that peace doesn't come from being loved by everyone. It comes from being loved genuinely by the right people. That empty chair at Thanksgiving, it wasn't meant for me after all. It was meant for the version of myself I'd been ignoring for 40 years. The woman who deserved rest, respect, and real love. And now, she finally has a seat at her own table. Greed destroys families faster than any argument, any distance, or any disagreement ever could. When people start seeing you as an inheritance rather than a person, you've already lost them. You just might not know it yet. Don't wait for people to value you. Value yourself first. Set boundaries. Demand respect. And remember, the people who truly love you will never make you feel like you're just a bank account with a heartbeat. Family is about more than blood. It's about showing up, being present and loving without conditions or calculations. Teach people how to treat you and never be afraid to walk away from those who only love what you can give them. So now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven Daniel and Jessica? Or would you have cut them off like I did? Have you ever experienced something similar, where someone you loved saw you as nothing more than what you could provide for them? How did you handle it? Let us know in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing right now. And if this story touched your heart, moved you, or made you think differently about family and boundaries, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about resilience, betrayal, justice, and finding yourself again. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. Never forget your worth, and never ever let anyone make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, because you deserve it.